The mall has always been my little refuge after a long day at work. There's something about the buzz of conversations, the smell of pretzels baking, the shine of store windows. It just makes me breathe easier. That afternoon, I walked in with a sense of calm, lighter on my feet than usual. My mission was clear: find the perfect birthday gift for my mother. Not just anything, but something thoughtful, something that would make her smile the way only she can. I live for these small rituals. They remind me that even when life gets messy, there are pieces of it I can control. I stopped at a cafe, the cozy one tucked between two stores, and ordered my usual cappuccino. The first sip warmed me instantly, the foam brushing against my lip like a soft little luxury. I sat by the glass wall, watching people hurry past, teenagers laughing, moms tugging toddlers along, a couple bickering over shopping bags. I couldn't help but smile, feeling like I was part of some bigger rhythm, yet safely in my own bubble. For a moment, I felt grounded, like life was exactly where it needed to be. With my coffee finished and my mother's gift neatly wrapped in a bag swinging from my hand, I headed to the parking lot. The air was warm, carrying that faint, almost metallic smell of asphalt cooling after the heat of the day. I even caught myself humming a tune I'd heard on the radio earlier. Everything felt light, almost perfect. But then I turned a corner, and my breath hitched. Just a few rows away, I spotted a car I knew too well, my husband's. At first, I thought maybe I was mistaken. There are plenty of cars like his, I told myself, even though I could spot that dented bumper anywhere. My pace slowed, my heart tapping harder in my chest. What were the odds he'd be here? David had told me he was working late all week, drowning in meetings. I shook my head, pushing down the sudden rush of unease. I wanted to hold on to the calm I'd felt just moments ago. I clutched the gift bag tighter, its sharp edges pressing into my palm, almost grounding me. My mind tried to rationalize. Maybe he'd just stopped quickly. Maybe he wasn't even here anymore. But the sight of that car rooted me to the spot. I couldn't just walk past, not without knowing. It was as if the universe had pulled me into this exact spot at this exact moment, daring me to look closer. And yet, a part of me prayed I wouldn't have to. I stood there in the middle of the lot, the hum of engines and the sound of shopping carts rattling in the distance blending into background noise. The warmth I'd carried from my cafe stop now felt heavy, stifling. My skin tingled with unease, and I could feel the calm of my perfect day slipping away. Something inside whispered that my life was about to tilt in a way I wasn't ready for. I started walking slowly, each step deliberate, as though the ground beneath me had suddenly turned fragile. My eyes stayed fixed on that car, every detail etched sharper the closer I got. My heartbeat was no longer steady. It was wild, uncontained, like it already knew something my mind refused to accept. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that I'd laugh at myself later for overthinking. But deep down, I felt a shadow creeping in. The mall's fluorescent lights spilled into the lot, catching the glossy black paint of David's car. I stopped a few rows away, close enough to know without a doubt it was his. My throat tightened, the easy hum of my song replaced with silence. The gift bag felt heavier now, almost ridiculous in my hand. A birthday present for my mother, wrapped with care, suddenly seemed so small against the storm rising in me. I stood still, frozen between the ordinary day I'd had and the unraveling that was just beginning. My gut twisted, torn between turning back and stepping closer. Something told me that whatever happened next would split my life into a before and after. And as I lingered there, heart racing, I didn't yet know just how right that feeling was. I froze when I saw the driver's door open. For a split second, my brain begged me to look away, to turn and leave before the truth spilled out. But my eyes locked on the figure stepping out. It was David, my husband. The man who said he was buried in work, too busy for even a quick dinner with me. My chest tightened so suddenly it was hard to breathe. And then she appeared. A woman slid out of the passenger seat, laughing softly as she adjusted the strap of her dress. The sound of her voice carried across the lot, light and easy, like they had shared a private joke. I felt my stomach drop as if the ground had opened beneath me. She leaned closer to him, her hand brushing against his sleeve like it belonged there. I could barely process it. Before I could even blink, David bent down and kissed her, quick, casual, familiar. My whole body went cold, like ice rushing through my veins. I wanted to scream, to run, to make it all stop, but I couldn't move. Instead, I stayed hidden behind a row of cars, clutching the gift bag like a shield. Every instinct in me screamed that nothing would ever be the same again. I crouched slightly, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone could hear it. They walked together toward the mall's exit, still laughing, completely unaware that I was just a few feet away. I could see the ease in his body language, the way his hand brushed the small of her back, guiding her as if it were second nature. That simple gesture gutted me more than the kiss. It wasn't just a fling, it was intimacy. I pulled my phone from my purse with trembling hands. My fingers shook as I unlocked it, the screen glowing harsh in the dim light of the lot. For a second I hesitated, asking myself if I really wanted proof of what my eyes had already seen. But then, a surge of clarity hit me. This wasn't about doubt. This was about survival. So I lifted the phone and snapped photo after photo, capturing every cruel detail. Each click of the camera felt like a betrayal carved into stone. My chest was tight, my breaths short, but I kept going until I knew I had enough. I didn't want a confrontation. Not here, not now. No shouting match in the middle of a parking lot. I wanted something more permanent, something that would burn when the time was right. And in that moment, a vow formed inside me. He would regret every single lie. I lowered my phone slowly, my hand still trembling, and pressed it against my chest like it was the only thing holding me together. David's laugh echoed faintly as he walked farther away, his voice mixing with hers, carefree and warm. That sound used to be mine, a melody stitched into the fabric of our life. Now, it was poisoned. Every note of it cut through me, sharp and merciless. For a moment, I just stood there, paralyzed, my whole body humming with disbelief. The parking lot around me blurred, headlights passing, strangers talking, carts clattering against pavement. None of it registered. All I could feel was the weight of betrayal settling deep into my bones. My marriage, my trust, my sense of safety. It all cracked in a single heartbeat. I was no longer the same woman who had walked into the mall that afternoon. But instead of collapsing, I straightened my back. If he thought I'd break, he didn't know me at all. No tears. Not yet. I would carry this storm inside me, quietly, until the moment I chose to let it loose. And as I turned away, clutching the photos like a secret weapon, I knew my silence would be the sharpest blade. When I walked through the front door that evening, David was already home. He looked up from the couch with that same easy smile, as if nothing in the world had shifted. "Long day?" he asked, his voice steady, his tone practiced. I forced a small nod, setting my mother's gift bag on the table, my face calm. Inside, though, it felt like a storm had taken root in my chest, beating against my ribs with every breath. We sat down for dinner, the same routine as always. Plates, silverware, a soft clink of glasses. He talked about work, about deadlines and meetings, weaving the same excuses he had fed me for weeks. I listened, nodding at the right times, even asking questions, but every word that left his mouth felt like a fresh lie burning the air between us. My hands stayed steady, my smile faint, though inside I was unraveling thread by thread. I studied him differently that night. The way his eyes darted when I asked certain questions, the slight pause before he gave an answer. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was confirmation, layered over confirmation. And I matched his performance with my own, giving him no reason to suspect that I already knew, that I had seen, that I had proof. My silence became my armor, and he had no idea how dangerous that really was. The next morning, while David showered, I sifted through the pockets of his jacket hanging carelessly by the door. My fingers brushed over folded receipts, small scraps of his so-called late nights. A bar tab. A boutique purchase I never received. Each slip of paper was a thread, and together they wove the story he thought he'd hidden. I tucked them away, careful not to disturb a thing. My heart pounded, but my face would later wear only calm. At work, I found myself replaying the parking lot scene in my mind like a cruel film. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the kiss, the way she touched him, the lightness in his laugh. But instead of spiraling, I let it fuel me. I started saving his text notifications when they flashed on the screen, memorizing his excuses, building a collection of truths he didn't know I had. Quietly, piece by piece, I was constructing the puzzle. When I returned home, he kissed my cheek like always, oblivious. I smiled back, my mask flawless. But inside, I was already steps ahead. Every lie he told I stored away, carefully labeled and locked in my mind. And as he carried on with his performance, I began to picture the day I'd flipped the script. The day I'd finally let the truth speak louder than his rehearsed lines. By the end of the week, my folder of quiet evidence had grown heavy. The photos from the parking lot sat at the center, cold and undeniable, but now they were surrounded by screenshots, receipts, and carefully observed patterns. Every time David looked at me across the dinner table, I wondered if he could sense the trap forming beneath his feet. But no. He was too wrapped up in his own web, convinced I was still the blind, trusting wife. At night, I'd lie awake listening to his steady breathing, the rise and fall of his chest beside me. I wondered how many times he had come home from her arms straight into mine. The thought burned, but I didn't let it consume me. Instead, I stored it like firewood, fuel for when the time came to burn everything down. My silence was no longer weakness. It was strategy. I started to notice how ordinary life looked from the outside. Neighbors waving, friends checking in, the two of us appearing solid. But behind closed doors, I held the truth like a blade, sharp and ready. He had no idea how close his downfall was, no clue that every step he took was leading him straight into my hands. And soon, I would decide exactly how and when to let him fall. When I suggested hosting a family dinner, David's face lit up. He thought it was my way of showing affection, of reminding everyone that we were still the perfect couple. I played my part beautifully, brushing his hand in public, leaning in close, whispering little endearments that made his parents smile. Inside, I was ice. Every sweet gesture was rehearsed, every smile sharpened into a weapon he couldn't see coming. I invited his parents, his closest friends, even a few people he admired deeply. To him, it looked like a celebration of us, a showcase of unity. He walked around the house humming, completely unaware that he was preparing for his own humiliation. I set the table with care, polished the wine glasses, and placed candles just so. To the outside world, it was love. To me, it was the stage for a reckoning. The night of the dinner, the house filled with laughter and clinking glasses. David thrived in the spotlight, telling stories, soaking in the admiration. I sat beside him, nodding, laughing, letting him bask. But underneath, my pulse was steady, my mind clear. I knew what was coming, and I savored the anticipation. Every second that passed brought me closer to the moment the mask would shatter. After dinner, I stood and tapped my glass lightly, drawing everyone's attention. I thought it might be nice to share some memories, I said warmly, gesturing toward the screen I had set up earlier. Smiles spread across the table. They were expecting nostalgia, anniversaries, maybe even a romantic tribute. David leaned back in his chair, pride written all over his face, convinced he was about to be celebrated. The slideshow began innocently enough: vacations, birthdays, little moments of us smiling together. People chuckled, clapped, whispered sweet remarks. I watched David out of the corner of my eye, saw him squeeze my hand, utterly convinced of my devotion. He had no idea the ground beneath him was about to give way. I felt my heartbeat steady itself, a strange calm taking over. Then, with one click, the screen changed. Gasps rippled through the room as the parking lot photo appeared. David pressed against another woman, his lips on hers, their intimacy undeniable. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, almost electric. I didn't look at the guests. I didn't need to. My eyes stayed on David, watching the color drain from his face, his pride collapsing in an instant. David's hand slipped from mine as if burned. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the screen and him, waiting for some kind of explanation. His mother's fork clattered against her plate. His father's jaw tightened. The air grew so heavy it felt like even the candles flickered under its weight. And there he sat, pale, caught, stripped of the charm he loved to wear. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I let the silence stretch, let him drown in it. Every second that ticked by was a reminder that he no longer controlled the narrative. This wasn't his story anymore. It was mine. He fumbled for words, stammering something about a misunderstanding, but no one believed him. The evidence was right there, larger than life, undeniable. His empire of lies had cracked wide open, and I sat perfectly still, calm, composed, the center of gravity in that room. My heart no longer raced. My breathing was steady. I had waited for this moment, crafted it with patience, and now it was unfolding exactly as I intended. Yet I wasn't finished. The real blow was still waiting, the one that would turn this humiliation into a final, irreversible reckoning. I finally rose from my chair, the weight of every eye in the room shifting to me. "This," I said calmly, gesturing toward the screen, "is what David was doing while telling me he was working late." My voice didn't shake. In fact, it carried stronger than I expected, cutting through the silence like a blade. I saw faces turn toward me, some in shock, others in sympathy. David's eyes pleaded, but I didn't flinch. I reached into my bag and pulled out a neatly folded stack of papers. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I continued, my tone steady, deliberate. "And I've already moved my things." I slid the divorce documents across the table toward him, watching his hands tremble as he realized this wasn't just public shame. This was the end. His greatest pride, his family's approval, now crumbling in front of him. His mother gasped, his father shifted uncomfortably, and his friends sat in stunned silence. David tried to speak, his voice catching on half-formed words, but I cut him off with a look that said everything. This wasn't a debate. This wasn't a conversation. This was my verdict, and I wanted him to feel every ounce of the disgrace he had so carelessly earned. I turned back to the guests, my voice softer now, but no less firm. "You all deserve to know the truth," I said, my gaze sweeping across the table. For months, he looked me in the eyes and lied, pretending to be the devoted husband. But this, I pointed toward the frozen image on the screen. This is who he really is. A murmur spread through the room, the kind that comes when respect dies in an instant. David's mother covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. His father stared at him with disappointment so raw it almost filled the silence for me. David reached for me across the table, desperate, whispering my name as if it could erase what had been laid bare. I pulled my hand back before he touched me, my refusal loud without a single word. That gesture was final. I stood taller, refusing to let the moment swallow me. This wasn't about rage anymore. It was about reclaiming myself in the brightest, most undeniable way. I had carried his lies quietly, had built the case piece by piece, and now I was free of them. The papers on the table weren't just legal documents. They were my declaration. I was done living in his shadow. I gathered my things slowly, making sure every eye in that room stayed on me. My purse over my shoulder, the gift bag for my mother still in my hand, the one detail of the day that remained pure. I looked at David one last time. His face was ashen, his pride shredded in front of the people whose approval meant everything to him. That, I knew, was the wound that would never heal. I didn't shout, didn't cry, didn't let him see me broken. Instead, I held my head high and walked toward the door. Each step was steady, deliberate, a rhythm that carried me further from the lies and closer to freedom. Behind me, I could hear whispers rising, the rustle of chairs, the stunned disbelief settling into the room. I didn't turn back. Not once. As I stepped into the cool night air, I breathed deeply, as if taking my first full breath in months. The weight on my chest lifted, replaced by something stronger: resolve. David would forever be remembered not as a husband, not as the man he pretended to be, but as the liar who was exposed in front of his own family. And I would be remembered as the woman who refused to be deceived one moment longer.